The following is a production of Texas Lutheran University. For more information, please visit tlu.edu.
Good morning. Good to see you all here this morning. My name is Lisa Craddock. I'm the Director of Academic Support here at TLU, and it's my privilege to get to introduce our speaker. Dr. Refugio Rochin is a longtime leader in promoting innovation and change in higher education settings and a published author and internationally recognized expert in his fields of economics, Latino studies, and international development. He completed his PhD at Michigan State University with additional graduate and undergraduate degrees in communication and economics from the University of Arizona and UC Berkeley. He is an accomplished program developer and principal investigator. As he says, his professional aim has been to enhance the effectiveness of programs and policies that improve education, socioeconomic conditions, health and environment, and community well-being. To achieve his goal, he engages in community service, research and evaluation, networking, and training through various government and charitable organizations. He works closely with both public and private sectors to strengthen their effectiveness in multicultural settings. He actively mentors to foster professional careers and future generations of leaders. Dr. Rochin will speak until about 10 after 10, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers. So if you have a question, and I hope you do, please come up to the microphones that are here at the front of the stage and speak clearly into them. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Rochin.
Thank you, Lisa. Órale, amigos, ¿cómo están? Estoy bien. I want you to notice the title up here. Well, my thing isn't working, I don't think, my pointer. Carlos Malo Califas. Carlos Malo Califas is from my language called Callow. And I'm going to talk about how it influenced my life and future. According to a scholar, Jose Antonio Borciaga, who was a professor at Stanford, Chicano Callow is a combination of a few basic influences: Hispanicized English, Anglicized Spanish, and the use of archaic 15th century Spanish words. Now, Callow is a language that is very intimate and very close to me and others who grow up in a community or barrio in the U.S., where you have dual languages and you have the influence of both, but in the household, it's a little different matter. Sometimes one speaks one language, but usually, being in the environment where English is spoken outside the home, you mix them up. And sometimes you mix them up in strange and funny ways. And when you do that, often our response is to either laugh or have a good frame of mind about the use of the words, but generally you understand, and you don't make fun of the person, you end up adopting the word. So that's something of the background of Callow. And the term califas itself is actually an old archaic Spanish word. In the oldest novels, the very first novel written about California was written in 1540, and it led to a readership that got interested in searching for the Amazon women. Is actually a novel about the Amazon women in the island of California. So very important, of course, are our families. And I usually refer to them often in my life, like many of us in our Hispanic households or Mexican households like mine. And we've, over the time, adopted some phrases. When my sisters and my brother and I talk about our family, one-on-one. We don't talk about mom and pop. We all say, my father, my mother. And my sister or brother will say, my father, my mother. And we don't even think about it as being like, why do we say it that way? But it's a form of mis padres. So one of the things about Callow is it has, there's actually a dictionary and some scholars who like to study its a generation of words and words that last a long time. So up here, I wish I had a pointer. This one I thought was working, but it doesn't. But I just leave these for you to see. You can probably recognize some if you've been around the neighborhood where Spanish and English is spoken, or in some of these barrios or communities here in South Texas. And some of them look like English. On the bottom left, huacho. Huacho means watch it. But we can spell it with an H to make it look more Spanish. And we say, ahí te huacho. See you later. And we say things like chingon. But chingon doesn't necessarily mean a bad word. Chingon just means a bad word. It means something big, something like the highest position. You call that person of, this high stature either la chingona or el chingon. But don't think of those as bad. Because part of our Callow does have a bad side to it. And that bad side we call taboo Callow, and that usually comes from those bad people in our neighborhoods or barrios. And in my day, I was born in 1941. So my day of growing up was 1940s and 1950s, way before you and your parents maybe. So when I was growing up, we had a phenomenon of people called Pachucos. And Pachucos were very hip. You see them today in neighborhoods with those baggy pants way down below their knees or close to it. And Pachucos on the opposite hand, they had a fame for being very crude and very rough. And if they were alive today, they would be leading the rap singing phase. And they would say cuss words. This is a Pachuco. And we had many Pachucos, not a lot, but young people who dressed the opposite of what you see young hipsters dressing today. They wore these long coats, kind of baggy pants, a hat, all kinds of hats, sometimes with feathers and stuff. And they also wore ornaments, a lot of jewelry and stuff hanging off the side. This one is a picture of a Pachuco with, ready to get dressed. I happened to have been in the Smithsonian 2 weeks ago at the center that I created. I was there, the founder of the Smithsonian Latino Center, and they had an exhibit on the Pachuco. And they showed one ornament, and they used the same picture. I didn't know that. But that's a Pachuco, and that's our kind of a lifestyle. Now, Callow de Pachucos, read these carefully. That's why they're in tiny print. You don't want to memorize these words, so I might go through this very fast. But if you want my PowerPoint and broaden your knowledge, you can send me an email. I'll send it to you. Some people like these words better than the nice Callow. And, I'd say something like camaradas, que hubo. And like the camaradas would be the homeboys and things. And they would, carnal, you'll see, meaning comes from blood, carne. And so these types of hip language were a part of the Pachuco language. Now, my parents didn't want us to learn the Pachuco Callow, but they were very empathetic because when you grow up in a barrio and you see even the Pachucos get mistreated because they look like immigrants and probably corralled or profiled and given a bad time. So my parents were, I'd say empathetic, but didn't want us to be Pachucos. They didn't want me to be a Pachuco. They were empathetic because my father was an immigrant, and my mother was a second, third generation immigrant in California. So they always thought of the Pachuco as being mal educado, or sin educación, which is not very well educated. But oddly enough, my parents hardly had any education. My father, almost none in Mexico in the villages in the Sierra Madre where he was born. And my father was born in the countryside it took usually 3 days by horse to get to. I visit occasionally because it's so hard to get to. It's way up in the Sierra Madre. He used to take horses, now you can take an old bus to get there. And when he was 8 years old in 1916, his father, or my grandfather, was murdered, assassinated. So my father grew up with 8 siblings, a mother who moved the family to Mazatlan to get away from this rough area and possible more killings. And when he was only 15 years of age, I can't believe this, he set out on his own. He said, he talked to some people and he thought he was going to Los Angeles, and he did. He got to the Tijuana border, found out he could enter if he paid $8, signed up, paid $8. He worked hard, he shined shoes to do that, and then crossed the border, and from that point on, he became a U.S. resident, and then later a citizen. He went to Wyoming to work on the railroad, more on the chef side because he was under 20 years of age. And then he got shot in the back and went back to California where it was safer for him. He was shot in the back to be robbed, and he was robbed. So he ended up getting back to Riverside area of California, worked in the groves as a water sprinkler guy, and met my mom. My mom was a singing sensation. You've probably seen Selena. I liken my mom to Selena. Till the day she died at 86 years of age, she was singing and playing the piano. It's kind of, unfortunately, she's in kind of a state of dementia. But she'd sit at that piano, and the memories would just flow, and the songs would come out at that age. But anyway, this is the story of my mom, that she was playing when she was 15 years of age at a meeting, kind of like an induction meeting of the Hispana Alianza or Association, and she was very hot, and she was sat with her aunt. Her aunt was her same age. So you tell the families. My mother's aunt was the same age as my mother, and my mother's aunt, same age at 15, was a chaperone. It's part of the tradition. So my mother is sweating, and she says, "I wish I had a glass of water." And in front of her, a glass of water came. And that was my dad. And he said, I'll never forget that. He said, love at first sight. So they were married 86 years. So they became lifelong role models for me, and they actually became very prosperous. They developed a Mexican food business, and at first the customers were Mexican people. They would buy the provisions and sell to people working in agriculture. Then they started a little store, and they would sell the produce. And then they had 2 grocery stores in Palm Desert. And then they moved to Carlsbad because of the heat of Palm Desert. My mother got very sick in that. And then in Carlsbad, I was born in 1941. But they had 5 children, and we had very conservative life. This is my mother when she was like 13. She was the princess in the middle school, and middle school in those days was like high school. And here's my father in his business. He's the one on the left side here with the white shirt, with his hand on the podium. And he's my size exactly. He was about 6 feet tall. So we learned as kids that our parents were loving, but we also learned that they had things that we had to do. All of us grew up learning how to work, and we developed values. We were drilled on honesty and integrity and being able to earn our own way. And they never really talked about education. It wasn't a part of it. We were going to be working people. We were going to be dignified by work. And we were going to honor and respect our name. We were always reminded that we were Rochin/Rodriguez. My mother's last name is Rodriguez. And we would always have relatives coming in, and just when a relative would come in, you just had them come in the house, and they could stay, and we didn't question them. The only time I heard a complaint about this was years later. My mother would say, God, I remember those days with 3 kids. Your uncle, his 2 kids would pop in, and they couldn't get rid of them. But she fed them and took care of the kids. So those are my parents, and I had 3 sisters who today, they're alive. They say, you never had the same parents I had. Your parents were different from my parents, and they were right. I didn't realize this. A male, like me, the first elder male, is very prized and special in that household. This is our family, and that little guy sitting on the front row there on the ground there with his hands like this, that's me. Next to me is one of my sisters. And then I have cousins and uncles. Behind me is my father's mother. And then behind my sister is my mother's mother. And that's my father and mother around them. They were very proud. The first time my grandma from Mexico ever came to the U.S., didn't speak a word of English, always had some kind of accents of Indian heritage. But we bring all the family. So I have 2 sisters in the back row and cousins, all the same age. But I have a household in Mexico, all Rochin, where we had a family reunion. We can get 500, 600 people together, all cousins. How can I have so many cousins? One uncle of mine had over 50 kids. How did he have over 50 kids? He had 5 families called casitas. That's how you get big families. Now, one of the things about growing up in this sheltered household that was kind of prosperous, my father and mother were both working hard, was they didn't talk about discrimination. They didn't really go into it. They never, in retrospect, I can never ever remember them complaining. All they would do is talk about how we got to work and how important it is and how we had to contribute value to our family and to our lives. But there were a lot of things going on that were very troubling that I learned later on. And some of the things that we faced, and I had some personal experiences that I relate. We had separate seating on buses and theaters. This is in Southern California. This is in the 40s. When I grew up in the 30s and 20s, in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, it was worse. We had redlined housing, which means you couldn't build or buy a house in an outside area of the Mexican town. In California, you find a lot of places that are memorable as Mexican towns. I don't know if you have those here. You might say, that's the Mexican town. But that's what we had then. We had nobody on the consuls representing us. We were in school denied Spanish. If we said something in Spanish, usually the principal would either make us stand in the corner or just embarrass us, or if we persisted with some Spanish, they would send us home. We had limited use of local facilities like a swimming pool, roundups. I personally saw roundups of we call them La Migra. La Migra, the people in the light green cars. Today they changed the color under Homeland Security. And so ICE is the word, not Migra, and it's a lot different today. And we had separate schools. Life in the barrio, it was, for me, wonderful. And I always enjoyed going to my grandparents. They only spoke Spanish. And my grandfather taught me how to cut nopales leaves. He had a nopal garden, which is a cactus garden. We cut the tunas, the little things, and ate those. And we had pigeons that we ate, lots of pigeons. And we had chickens, and I loved that. But I'd love to go to the Colton plunge. And so when the day came, which was Friday, I'm a little tyke, I'm going to go swimming. And this happened up until I was about the age 12, go to the plunge. But I didn't realize until I think about it, our day in the pool was always Friday. And that was the day before they cleaned the water out. And later on you think about that and you say, that's not fair. But our parents, said, they kept working and working as if some of these things didn't really happen, because they took pride in their business, and the amount of Mexican food that we sold was really huge. We had a lot of customers that just loved our place. Similar place here, El Charro, Tapatia, is kind of similar to the first restaurant we had. Later, my parents built a bigger restaurant, which could seat 500 people. So we were pretty prominent food. Now, one of the things that was very common in Southern California, because it's a agricultural area, all of California pretty much is agriculture, but in Southern California we have citrus groves, we have avocado groves, we have large numbers of crops that were hand picked, very intensive for labor. But we didn't know, I mentioned the migra coming in and doing sweeps of our restaurant looking for undocumented, but I later on became a historian, and I mentored a doctoral student who is now a professor at University of Minnesota, and she wrote the book on the period of repatriation. She dug into the archives and proved that people were just taken off the streets by profiling, which means if you look Mexican, you were Mexican, you weren't legal. So they had roundup sweeps, and they had big buses, and they just pick up people in a day, put them on a train and take them to the border in Tijuana and make them walk across. Those were periods of bad time for the laborers, and they were during the Depression. And as they were swifted across, they had no problem really getting kind of back. The border, there wasn't a wall, things like that. So they'd make it back, and they were very welcome because they were hard working in the fields. But in the history of this, it's quite funny that when World War II started, and we joined the U.S. joined the war cause in support of England in fighting off the German Nazi regimes, they were facing shortages of workers. While the military was really recruiting hard and developing up its forces, they were realizing the work production of food and basic industrial products was going to be slowed down for lack of work. So the U.S. made an agreement with Mexico and allowed for a system called the Bracero Program to be enforced. That meant that people in Mexico could go register and sign up, and people in Mexico would be shipped back. They got the other treatment, and they'd be treated very well. They'd be fed. They would arrive at camps, and the camps had to have the facilities with dorms and bunks and cafeterias, and there would be a pool of labor. So what happened was we developed in the 40s to cover the war effort to help feed America and to help the riveters, the women riveters, have more help with them, the Mexican workers. We had these people coming in. Well, you will probably hear some things about the Bracero Program, but the period of the Braceros ended about 1964, championed by a professor named Ernesto Galarza, first PhD sociologist, author, really amazing guy. I got to know him. And Ernesto Galarza said, well, all we're doing by bringing in the Braceros, number one, we are just supporting corporate agriculture, which doesn't care if any of the benefits or retirement plans are supported, doesn't care about the workers, just treats them as cheap labor. And then at the same time, we have workers now coming back from the war effort. We have a lot of Mexican people who are in the war effort themselves. Some fought in some amazing battles. Some of the medals of honors went to Mexican people. One around here is Longoria. I don't know if you've ever heard the name Longoria, but he was one of these heroes. And when that was happening, Ernesto said, we got to stop the flow from Mexico because we can't get the people who live here, even Mexicans, back on the job. So besides, you're just exploiting, so let's change the system. So we got the Bracero Program banned. And so in the end of 64, that ended. So from that time onward, if you look at the history of a Congress and the issue of immigrants, and if you look at the ag sector and the ag lobby and the issue of immigrants, you will find strange bedfellows. Ultra-conservative farmers want open doors. They want to have labor. You have ultra-conservatives right now who don't want any immigrants, thinking that they're going to come and take over the welfare system and be a drain on the resources. So, but you will find in Congress this effort to get these immigrants in just to work in fields. And if you look at the history, there's been cycles of policies, pro and con immigration from Mexico, just Mexico. And a lot of it goes back to the relationship we've had with Mexico over the Bracero Program. It worked. It was fulfilling. It really produced America's amazing capacity in agriculture, especially now the labor-intensive agriculture. The most prosperous agriculture today is that agriculture and production which is labor-intensive. Your bagged salads, your little raspberries, your blackberries, your every kind of fruit you can imagine today, high quality, hand-picked. So that's what you face today is, do we allow something like a Bracero Program again? Interesting enough, back in the 30s, schooling, as I said, was not equal. And in 1931, there was a case in Lemon Grove, which is a part of San Diego, of a child who was, kids going to school, and the kids were going to their regular school, and when they started the new school year, they went and they were told, no, this school is not yours. We built you a Mexican school. So they were told they had to go to the Mexican school, and they said, well, I'm not going to go to that place. It looks like a stable. I live here. I'm going to go to this school. So the Mexican families protested, hired some attorneys with the help of the Mexican consul, and then actually won the first case. Read the line in blue. Isn't it amazing that California law turned over and said you can't have separate schools? Why? Not because of equality issue. Oh, but you can't call those Mexicans not Caucasian. But you can still have the same discrimination against the other people who aren't Caucasian. So we got classified as Caucasian so that we could have the rights to go to those white schools. In 1941, however, the same thing happened. There was a case of a young child, Sylvia Mendez, who found it, she wanted to go close by to her school, not go to the Mexican school. The Mexican schools were still around. And she had an interesting Mexican father and Puerto Rican mother, and the parents were upset with the fact that she had to go, it's kind of like walking a long distance to go to her school. So they fought this case, and they won. And she was allowed to go to school, opening the doors. So this is 1941, the year I was born. By the time I started school, Schooling then was more open. When I started school, my first year at school was 1946. I had a mixed school. I had one big classroom, Mexican kids, white kids. There are no blacks in our community. We just didn't have that. We were Mexican or white. And the interesting thing, and I didn't really realize this, I was probably treated differently because I don't look, people always say, you don't look Mexican. I said, well, okay, what's a Mexican supposed to look like, And then I'd also be pretty snappy, maybe just too much, but I made it into what was called the A class. I knew I was in the A class, but most of my barrio friends, and they were my friends, my family, were in the B class or the C class. Well, this is a channeling program that if you're in the C class, what are you learning? Iron, auto shop, metals, labor things. If you're in the B class, you get a little bit of that, but you get some history and so forth, where if you're smart and desire to go to college, you might go to a community college. But if you're in the A class, you're kind of college bound. So that's the kind of schooling I grew up with, not knowing that there was that kind of segregation, A, B, C. I don't know what kind of schooling there is in Texas, but there may have been some of that. Now it's back to the two cases earlier. The case of Lemon Grove, Roberto Alvarez, the kid involved there, had an auditorium named after him. In the case of Sylvia Mendez, she won President Obama's the highest award to an American citizen, along with some others last year, honored for her championing civil rights and continuing to champion that since the time she was a little girl. So interestingly enough, my earliest sense of self-awareness was when I went to kindergarten. I was in a barrio, and I was happy-go-lucky, and just like this, in my first day of class, some white kid came up to me, and he started jabbing me in the chest like this, "You Mexican?" And I didn't know what he was doing. Like I said, it was mixed class. Other people like him and me were there, and then he pushed me to the ground, gave me a headbutt, boom, gave me black eyes. He called me a Mexican. I really didn't fathom that. So I go home crying, and my mother says, "Son, you are a Mexican." I said, "I'm Mexican?" "You're a Mexican. And we're proud of you." And I said, "Well," so it made me feel good. Really did. I didn't feel bad. I always felt good. So the next days, and even over the years, I still remember that little guy. He's still alive. We don't have a problem anymore. But it built my confidence. So it helped my identity a lot. It built my confidence so that I could do things based on that feeling of identity. And when in 1961 the Peace Corps came about, I was 20 years of age. I signed up for the Peace Corps before I finished my undergraduate and got in the Peace Corps and went to Columbia, South America. I had an interesting experience because I thought I was speaking Spanish, and the Colombians have a good Spanish, and they spoke with a purity. They think they have better Spanish than the Spaniards, and they're proud of it. And they would listen to me. I'd listen to them and understand, okay, it's kind of neat. Working in villages in the mountains there. And then they would look at me and go like, do these things. I said, "What's wrong? ¿Qué pasa?" "Bueno, no te entendemos. We don't understand you." "¿Qué pasa con guáchalo y míralo?" and words like that. And they said, "We don't know those words." But then after a while, they started treating me. That's me as a Peace Corps volunteer at 20 years of age, Peace Corps on the side here. And so they started thinking of me as a funny guy, and I got along very well. And then it dawned on me that I had to really learn Spanish, and they helped me with that. And because my unique form of Spanish was not Spanish completely, it was mixed barrio English and so forth, and I used terms that were expressive of fun and so forth. They had no clue I was trying to be friendly. But the interesting thing happened to me too. When I was in the Peace Corps, I was one of only 3 Chicanos and over 50 Anglo volunteers. And the Anglo volunteers, some of them had really good Spanish speakers. And the thing I got annoyed by was when they would correct my Spanish, and they'd make fun of me. "Hey, Rochin, speak Spanish," and I'm going like, oh. Like, I felt put down. I felt bad, and I buried that as like, they're trying to be better than me, and I didn't like that. I just tucked it in. But I realized, that people who spoke the language I did, I took an affection for them. I call them mi raza, my blood brothers, because we had that experience. I never felt that I was less than them. I just didn't like being corrected by them, who really didn't understand that my form of Spanish was probably incorrect, but it was a communication that I knew, and I did change. I became completely bilingual. So I learned to support English and Spanish learning, starting with whatever barrio or whatever community language you have, and I became very active as an expert on this language issues and kids, supporting the first English for Spanish speakers, or Spanish for Spanish speakers, which was really Callow, et cetera. So I've been an activist in that. Well, interestingly enough, this kind of person that grew up with this multicultural now experience overseas, I became focused. I wanted to work abroad. So I got my first job abroad after my PhD in Pakistan. And I was sent to Pakistan because I was Mexican. And I was sent there because Mexicans were being used in the agriculture to bring in their seed technology from wheat and potatoes and corn to help the Pakistanis feed their population. So teams of Mexicans and scientists were going into Pakistan. They hired me to be, because I was an economist, to be the researcher on this. And when I was in Pakistan, I found I had no problem. One of the things that really introduced me to the Pakistanis, and that's me over there with my little bigote. I was trying to look older. I was 28, 29 then. And that's my translator, Sadiq, to my right. And these are Pakistani people. You know where Osama bin Laden was killed? Abbottabad? I was not far from Abbottabad, in that village. The people are very nice, and I don't know what things are like today, but they're probably not as safe as they were then. But eating with my hands opened doors for me. How many of you have grown up eating tortillas with your hands? Kind of like their little cucharitas. Some people eat the tortilla, they get it, and then they roll it, and then they eat it like this. But I ate the tortilla, make little cuts, little diamonds, and then I'd use it like a little scoop. And when I was in Pakistan, in the villages, they always invited me. They'd sit down on the floor. There's no women. You can't have any women. The men would serve you, wash your hands, and then they bring out piles of chapatis. Well, those chapatis are nothing but big fat tortillas. And then they'd put these curries and sauces in the middle of the floor, and you could always almost reach it. But certainly, they put me in a spot where I could reach. And then you take your little chapati, it's just like my tortilla, and you roll it up, you stick it in there, and you go like this. Ah. When I did that, everybody would look at me because they said no other Anglo did that. And it really opened my doors. I was able to go in villages all over, and that helped my research. I did surveys on them, whether they are using the new technology from Mexico or not. So what it means to be bilingual by culture has always been embedded in me. I found that if I could be able to adapt customs and traditions and feel comfortable with language and the issues of learning new languages, that I could be able to go into any place. What has bothered me is times when I've seen American tourists in some of these places, and they're very uncomfortable, very squeamish, and I feel so bad for them. So I've been kind of, in my life, trying to be an advocate for the global mentality, the cross-culture, and the learning of language, even if you can't speak fluently. Just learn something. To be able to eat with people and to have fun and smile is really important for me. So I became an advocate early on for the field of Chicano studies. I was a professor of economics, and I was known as a global economist. I was very well published and known, but I started doing this work in Chicano studies, so I was a pioneer in developing the Chicano studies programs. And I advocated for the undocumented. This is a portrait by Malaquias Montoya, and the farm workers, which is on the right. And so I helped start the Department of Chicano Studies. Now, when I started the Department of Chicano Studies at University of California, Davis, I had two things in mind. One, we need to bring in the histories and the social studies and the issues that confront our population. But we need a program that creates jobs, that we just can't talk about us. We should not be exclusive, we should be inclusive. We should show how all the peoples and cultures have something similar to us. So we had opened the doors. So we were focused on jobs. When we designed our program, and this design has my imprint on it, said we need to teach people about culture and in terms of arts, the histories, the storytelling, the novels, the songs, and all that. And we need experts in that because we need cultural fluency. We need cultural competency, and that's produced in the libraries, and the schools, and the educational program. But we also need people who are experts in solving problems. So we need a policy social science component. So we have 2 tracks. The interesting thing today, and this is kind of unusual, UC Davis program of Chicano Studies is one of the largest enrolled programs at the UC Davis campus. And it's why it's so large and there's a strong demand is we run programs, and we're federally funded. We're good at grants. We have about a $5 million grant capacity right now. We run programs in Costa Rica. We had them in Argentina, Oaxaca, and we do this, and this is for our health policy transnational program. We were donated a big building in another city where kids were getting in trouble. We said, we'll take that building and we'll convert it into an art production lab. And so we teach silk screening to middle school kids and keep them off the streets, and they love it. The community loves it. So we're doing those things. We're real life concerned about jobs and concerned about practice. And a lot of our students are not Chicano. They don't speak Spanish, but they know that the population around them is different. They know that if they're going to be traveling, they're going to face different. And by including in their curriculum some of our courses, or by even majoring in one of these tracks of very applied stuff, they could do well in the future, and they have. There's Malachias Montoya, he's a retired artist. Now, part of our teaching, too, is that, those racial the issues of discrimination that we face. Is it 10:10? Did I finish? Okay. Well, it led us to work on the fact of the matter that we are not a race. That in our history and in our blood are all these genes. That we are a population that includes all the races. And that we are, if you look at our history of being Mexican, we were started by the Spanish mixing with the Indians. This is the case here of Doña Marina, who gave birth to the first Chicano kid. As far as our history knows, well documented. We're that kind of blood. If you look at the population of Mexicans in Mexico, they don't advertise this too much, but I guess that probably everybody, about half the population, can say they're black. How can they do that? Because if the principle of a drop of blood makes you black, then they have that. They're also Jewish. They have that. They're also Chinese. They have that. We had waves of immigrants. They're also Mennonite, right off the border down here from Texas and Arizona, Mennonites, and all these different kinds of peoples. Years ago, an author, Jose Vasconcelos, said, look at this. This phenomena of mestizaje, mixed blood, really is creating a person, an identity that's very different and unique. So he predicted that there will be a 5th race of people who harmonize, take it all, and that they'll have a certain spiritual, knowledgeable quality about them that'll make them leaders of the world. And becoming leaders of the world, they will be able to understand, if it's clear to them, that they are connected. So I don't necessarily profess what he says, but I think there's something that you should know. The mestizaje is happening in the U.S. The Hispanics are the fastest growing, largest community here. We have all these kinds of faces in our population. This was a mosaic produced by my students in my freshman class, students of all walks of life. My freshman seminar, they did a little book on demographics. And nationally, the population is growing. Around you, there's people of mixed blood. Around you, the people with different forms of language. And, if you look at the people who speak Callow, which is this mixture of Spanish and English, they have a ability to speak with as many as 900 million people, because in the world, there are 450 million people who speak English as their primary language, 450 million people who speak Spanish as their primary language, so a person speaking both can communicate with a huge number of people. And also the population of the Hispanic population in the U.S. alone is larger than the whole population of Canada. It's larger than every country in Latin America except for Brazil and Mexico. So what's the future? The future is going to be you. You're going to be facing these conditions. Do I have 2 minutes? Okay. Now, I really believe in education. I believe in an education that has the job orientation, that has a skills component, but also has the hearts, the arts, the music, the histories built into it. It's all part of the fabric that would make you into qualified and better for any kind of life in the United States. Not just a working life, but a life of society and a life of civil participation. So these are things we're going to be facing. One point on the side. When I've been invited to Europe to speak, and I said, why are you inviting me? Because you're Chicano. Why is that? We're interested in you. Really? Yeah, because your books and their writings are so much like we're seeing a need for. We got these Turks coming into Germany. We got these South Africans coming into France, and the Indians coming into England. So I met with a lot of these people. They study us because they see in our literature coping, addressing, manifesting ways to work together, to coexist. The future is yours. You have what you like. I'd like to make 7 points and some about what all this has meant to me. I've learned, and I now believe that all of you have a wonderful future ahead, and that you individually have much opportunity to contribute and enjoy your life in many ways. So one of the first principles I learned is identity. It's very important as you grow. Plant your feet. Know who you are. Be who you are. Second point for a good life is reach out. That means use your hands, use your embrace, use your Facebook, or whatever you want to really communicate values and beliefs and share that, but also learn to receive it and build your knowledge. Now, if you reach out one-to-one, fine. But it's also important to reach out through networks, which means join a group. I joined several groups, and I help create groups, and that helps us build the network. Third point for a good life, feel yourselves. Be able to use all your senses. Enjoy those things that you have. The 5 senses we talk about, but also there are senses. There's a sense of love. There's a sense of goodness, a sense of humanity. There's a sense when you want to be alone. Improve your senses. Realize they are innate qualities inside us, and learn how to use those personally, and also make yourself physically better. Another thing, dream. Often we take dreams as nightmares. That probably depends on what you ate and what movies you saw. But there are a lot of good dreams, and a lot of good dreams can really be visionary dreams. And personally, I've woke, early in the morning and just had, wow, I didn't realize, ideas. I used to be concerned about those because I'd forget. So I have a pad of paper and a pencil by my bed. And when a good dream, usually it's something of an idea comes up, and only when I write it down can I fall asleep. That's me, but maybe you're doing the same thing. The 5th point, act. That means be active, be involved, show some interest as well as these connections, these networks. Acting on dreams, acting on your senses is very important for life. Learn to act with some values and personal integrity. Another point here, I always say it's good to give a shout. How many know the Mexican grito? Who can give a Mexican grito? Mine is awful. Ay, 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 kind of thing. I always believe that those gritos, and now we have these yoga laughers, they do prove to be very warming. So I end with a mantra, and they all come from those words. PRFDAY. PRFDAY are the first letters of those things I was talking about. So I say these first words so you remember it. I call it a perfect day. PRFDAY. And if you can ever think of something about who you are and what you want to do, I always say, think of having a perfect day. And what do you do when you're 70? You give. And I thank you very much. Sorry I took up all the time.
Students at TLU engage in high-impact educational experiences that include civic engagement, aesthetic expression, critical thinking, and a focus on intercultural knowledge in a community that welcomes the interplay of faith and reason.